E agora eu vou convidar aqui ao palco para fazer este primeiro panorama, que é o nosso futuro com a inteligência artificial. O nosso convidado, essa palestra vai ser em inglês. Nós havíamos já alertado vocês para quem quisesse a tradução simultânea, pegar os fones no foyer. Agora é a hora, então, de usá-los, porque eu vou convidar aqui ao palco para esta primeira sessão o senhor Johan Gerber. Por favor, bem-vindo. Muito bem-vindo. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate this.
Yours.
I wonder what I have to do to get that selfie with the whole team in there.
Oh, yeah, too bad. Let's do it.
Let's
Why
do
not?
that. Absolutely.
Come on.
Absolutely.
With him now. Our special guest. Okay, just a sec. There we go. Yes.
See, there's perks of being a speaker here for sure, which is fantastic. Well, everybody, good afternoon. It's so good to see all of you here. I have to tell you, I absolutely love coming to Brazil. This is one of the few places in the world where there's just an energy of innovation and solving real problems and just getting on with things. And yeah, we worry about what's going on in the rest of the world, but ultimately you want to solve for what's happening here, what your consumers need. And that's always, every time I come here, I'm just amazed by the startup culture, even in big companies, the innovation culture. So really, really interesting. And I want to congratulate all of you. And that's why it's such a privilege to be here with you. Now, you will hear my accent. It's not the typical American accent, although I live there. I'm originally from South Africa, so just a little bit about myself. I started in the South African police force. And after about 10 years of chasing criminals, I realized, my goodness, there must be technology or something that we can actually stop them from doing this, and perhaps that's a little bit easier than trying to chase them afterwards. And so I joined Mastercard in Europe and got involved in our franchise world compliance. And for about 2 years, I had the opportunity to travel all over the world, including here, and visit with a lot of our financial institutions to understand the technology, the systems, the compliance problems, and the friction we have between compliance, innovation, scale and growth that's constantly as we manage our budgets. And that's been very helpful for me throughout my career as we were developing technologies and solutions, which we will talk about a little bit today as we go forward. But let me jump into this, because after 2 years, I came across this thing called AI. And this was back literally in the year 2003, so it's almost 21 years ago. It gives away my age a little bit, but it became clear to me that this technology will change the world for us. It took us a long time before computing power finally got to the place where we can start realizing the true value. We've been seeing the value of it over the many, many years in specific use cases like fraud detection and so forth. But now with real computing power, use cases like generative AI and so forth are coming to the forefront, which is just absolutely fantastic. So as you will probably know by now, I'm a big fan of AI, and so I'm going to put it out there. I'm very optimistic around the power and the influence of what AI will do in society, but also for us as businesses, and also for anybody who's in risk management or cybersecurity, the power that it will bring here. And so we'll talk a little bit about how these two things interchange as we go through the conversation today. But let me jump straight into things. So as part of my role today, what I'm responsible for in the company, in Mastercard, is I look after all of our cybersecurity products, all of our crypto security products, as well as everything related to consumer disputes and dispute management. So we hear about all the things that are hitting our customers. We can see a lot of what's happening in the world of cyber. Now, I'm not a CISO, so I'm not the Chief Security Officer. My responsibility is not to protect Mastercard per se, but it's really to work with the industry to see how do we embed security into our networks, into our core products, how do we bring the world together in different places. And that's why being here and seeing how the industry connects here is so important for us, and why we love to be part of an event like this to help facilitate that conversation. Because if I look at the world holistically, one of my biggest fears as a professional in the security world is that the world has become very fragmented, very nationalistic. Everybody's kind of looking at what about me and what about my own place. But when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to fraud, we have to have a global lens, and we have to look wider than just what and who we are. And that's where we think, as a company, we can play a very big role in facilitating, helping you see what's happening in other places, how that's coming and affecting Brazil and your whole region, and how we can also tell the rest of the world how what's happening here impacts the rest of the world as well. Now, the one thing that's very different if you look at the world of cybersecurity where the criminals live and where we as an industry live is they don't use words like differentiation or competitive advantage or intellectual property or trade secrets or things like that. One of the most amazing things is that whenever there is a vulnerability that a cyber criminal finds, their greatest pride is to tell the world as soon as possible. I think maybe it's a bit of an ego thing, but the problem we have is whenever there's a vulnerability, the news spread like wildfire. There are dark web forums all over the place, and the information run. Now, they've created a very interesting industry around this, which is really interesting. What we've noticed in the criminal enterprise is that they are segmenting. So you will have, for instance, somebody will post a new vulnerability has been discovered in Outlook, like what we just heard earlier this week. And immediately, all the criminals who are smart enough can go and try to exploit that vulnerability. Then you've got a group of criminals who will create hacking as a service, all the way through do it yourself, all the way through to managed services where they will do the hacking on your behalf. You have things like money laundering as a service. We have found in some arrests in Europe where the average fee that a money launderer takes for doing it as a service is about 4%. So they will launder your money for you, and they'll take a 4% commission. So it's really interesting how the world has become more sophisticated. We see criminal enterprises who, quite frankly, are being run like real companies. They have vacation, they have actual numbers of days of leave, they have team building exercises, they have policies on how they do things and what they do and what they don't do. So we see we're not up against the teenager in the bedroom who's doing this for fun afterwards. We are seeing this as an organized enterprise. And so that's, I think it's really important for us to understand and to know. And you can see just some of the examples of how criminals share data, what they do. This thing called Worm GPT is basically ChatGPT without the restrictions of not providing malicious intent. So any cyber criminal can go in there and say, how do I create a piece of malware to exploit a vulnerability? And it will generate a piece of code and they will send it to you via link. So all sorts of different ways. And that's my biggest concern about generative AI when it comes to cybersecurity. It has the implications that criminals can now scale their attacks. So in the past, we know that criminals used AI to understand or scan, for instance, 1,000 companies, figure out who's got a specific vulnerability. Once they have the number of companies, they will actually go and they will now deploy their hacking tools. With ChatGPT, I can have AI understand what vulnerability every company has, and then I can have the AI generate the code to actually attack it. So you can actually automate and scale the attack. And so one of the most important messages that I want us to take away from here is there's no hiding here. There's no, they will go after somebody else with a bigger brand, or they will go somebody else who's got a bigger footprint, or anything like that. All of it is automated. So if you're on the internet today, they will know about you, and if there's a vulnerability, they will actually be able to find it. So that's something that I think is important for us to know. The unethical use of AI, just very, very briefly, in addition to the cybersecurity piece, is the use of generative AI for social engineering and scams. One of our biggest worries, which is something else that I think all of us should pay very close attention to. In most organizations that I visit throughout the year, we look at cybersecurity is one organizational component, fraud typically a different one, my compliance and money laundering will probably is a completely different one. They don't share, very few times they actually share the same technology, or they're not in the same organizational structure. If you look at the criminals, they run horizontally across those services. So one of the pieces of advice that we give a lot of financial institutions that we talk to, you need to start thinking through how do you bring your fraud, compliance, and cybersecurity folks much closer to each other. In Mastercard, we created a fusion center. So literally a physical office. So irrespective of where you sit in the organization, if you touch any of those topics, somebody's representing your group within that room, and every single day they talk about what are you seeing in the world of cyber, what's new, what are we hearing around compliance and money laundering, what are we seeing out of the new trends in fraud. so that those things can be shared. And we can just get a little bit more organized. We are very siloed. The criminals, they just don't care. They do whatever they need to do to get there. So just some words of advice on things that we can do there. Now, very briefly, if we look at some of the trends that we see globally versus what's happening here in Brazil, cybercrime is now estimated to be a $10.5 trillion problem to the industry. Now, $10 trillion, sometimes these numbers are so big, it's hard to put them in context. If you put this in context, it means the criminal enterprise can go, they can buy Amazon, they can buy Apple, they can add Microsoft, they can add Mastercard and Visa in there as well. They can buy all these companies, and they will still have several billions of dollars left for spare. So that's kind of the size of this enterprise, and that's why I think it's really important to pay attention, because it's organized and is extremely well funded in the way they do business. So cybercrime is huge and is growing. The world is getting more digitized. I don't think there's anybody that will argue that point. We are seeing more devices coming online. We are seeing technology being embedded in every consumer experience. Whether I'm shopping online, if I get into my car, we see more and more automotive manufacturers or car manufacturers embedding AI into their systems as well. So this is just becoming so pervasive in every single area. And for that reason, as a company, we decided a good number of years ago, we need to look beyond just the transaction. You need to look at the entire environment within which we operate. And that's something that I would strongly recommend you within your organizations look as well. Look at the entire consumer journey versus trying to break up just in the individual steps. But you need to look at that end-to-end. The moment somebody walks into the digital storefront, so they open up my app, they open up my website, what happens there? And you need to continuously look at security all the way through. The total environment around it as well. Something that we feel is becoming increasingly important. If you look at Brazil specifically, just to bring this a little bit in more focus, according to a company called Trend Micro, which is some of you may know, it's a cybersecurity company. Brazil and the US share spots number 1 and 2 in the world of most vulnerable companies to cyber, or countries to cybersecurity attacks. In one end, it's of course it's a bad thing, because it means a lot of criminals are targeting you. But it's also a factor of the level of innovation, the pace of digitization that's happening in this industry. And so with that growth, you always create vulnerabilities, and that's where people want to attack. So that's also the reason why, as you look at your explosive growth in this country, as you look at your innovation, which you are so strong at, be very mindful around the security aspects. You hear us talk a lot about security by design. It really means from the foundation, you should think about security, not let's build this thing and then afterwards we have a meeting with the security folks and say, how do we secure this thing? It has to be part of the entire journey of design all the way through. Absolutely critical, important in the way we do things now. We need to be already concerned about what's happening when quantum comes into play. How do we protect our systems now for the future of what that will mean? So you really need somebody to help you think through all these risks that you want to address, so that you can provide the beautiful experience for your cardholders. I had a conversation earlier today with somebody to say, the wonderful thing about the digital world is we can actually create a beautiful experience. You have so much data, device identities, biometrics, all those kind of things that can help us to create a more safe environment. But it only works if the right technology is deployed, if you have the right technology in the right place of the consumer journey to do that. Very large surge in scams. Now scams, and this is why I talk about these things to be together. Scams without cybersecurity don't work together, because the criminals use cyber tools to hack into your identity or to steal your identity, to then create an account, to take the account over in your bank account, or to create a social engineering scam. So you can never really divorce these things from each other. And we see, especially in LAC, this is a big problem for us. It's already the second largest region that we can see from our data. And then in payment fraud specifically, so card not present fraud is already growing faster than anything else. And it's about 75% of all fraud comes from digital fraud or card not present fraud. Brazil specifically, we are seeing almost a 3.5x stronger growth in that same fraud type. So there's clearly that the criminals are really going after this area as well. So something that we can more than happy to work with you on. Now, let's talk a little bit about, oh, I'm going the wrong way. We don't want that. Let's talk a little bit about how we as a company think about these things. So what I want to do on the next couple of slides, just talk you through how are we approaching this problem? What are we doing, and give you some tips, and hopefully then we can get you onto the next session. As I understand, there's a very nice, good panel for us. We look at these three different types of pillars as we look at how do we globally look at this. And keep in mind what I said in the beginning. We don't want to just do it in one specific country or in one specific region. It's really important for us to look at this holistically across the world and how things move between different geographies. We're going to talk a little bit about how we mitigate cybercrime. I have 2 slides on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach on identity and scams. And then lastly, how we come back to the transaction and actually look at specifically protecting the payment ecosystem. The important thing to realize here is, again, a couple of years ago, Mastercard was very focused on the transaction itself, because that's our rails are there, that's where we spend most of our time. But we realized that it's impossible to catch the criminals if you only look at that. You need to look at the broader ecosystem. You need to look at the holistic digital environment within which your cardholders or your consumers are operating into. So, very quickly on this one. In terms of cybercrime, one of the things that we've realized is, as the world gets digitized and it becomes really, really complex, we create these beautiful experiences. Think about the future of cars. You know, you'll get into your car, and it may not even be yours, it may be just an Uber that's a self-driving thing. You'll go to the local coffee shop, they will already have your cappuccino ready for you or your espresso ready for you. You don't have to take your wallet out, you don't have to take your card out, you don't have to scan a QR code. You will just continue with your day, and your payments and things will just happen. And so what we've realized is that the world has become so interconnected and interdependent. So the concept of third-party risk management is now more important than ever before. The vast majority of big cybersecurity breaches came in via third party. And we see regulators very heavily on this space right now. Europe is leading the way. There's a new regulation coming in. It's called the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, or DORA, which many of you might have already been known, which is very much focused on how do I understand the third-party risk, not just my suppliers, the suppliers of my suppliers, and their suppliers. So like 3 or 4 layers deep in. Something very important. As a company, we acquired a company called Risk Recon, and we are now scanning every single entity that's connected to our network every 10 days to understand what vulnerabilities do we have, who's connected to whom, to understand that bigger picture. And something that we will be more than happy to talk with on anybody who's interested in looking at that a little bit more. Second of all is taking a look at all of our transactions holistically. Like everybody here does fraud detection today. You have different tools to help your customers prevent fraud, looking at every transaction at a time. We actually take a step back and we look at the holistic thing. Instead of looking at every individual transaction, we will say, why is it that this ATM in a specific place in Sao Paulo all of a sudden has more cross-border transactions than it should be expected here? Why am I seeing a surge of transactions out of Sao Paulo or out of Curitiba or wherever it may be in the world? Why is it that all of a sudden ATM transactions are jumping? So we look at more holistic patterns and trends, and very, very effective. This system in 2023 has declined $1.35 billion of transactions specifically for Brazilian cardholders. So this is things that we block, that we don't even send through to your bank. So before the bank even sees it, we'll just take care of it. So that's just housekeeping that we keep out, and you can imagine still the things that get through, how prevalent that is. Next up is, if I look at identity and trace, we have a specific strategy. We talk about device identities, and all of these things have multiple layers in them. So my device identity is more than just a device ID. It is what networks are it connected to, what is the typical location of that device. So it's made up out of a whole number of different attributes in how we create an identity. Your account identity as well. Behavioral and physical biometrics. Biometrics, very, very powerful. Behavioral biometrics, for anybody who does not know what that is, we actually acquired a company called New Data out of Canada, and they have a piece of software that looks at how you interact with your device. So it can, for instance, realize you're left-handed because you always type like this, or you type with 2 fingers, you type with 1, you always hold your device like this or like that, and it basically creates a biometric around how you use it on your laptop or on your how do you move your mouse. Every one of us have a pattern. So, for instance, when I open up my laptop and I need to find my mouse pointer, I do this kind of a curve, but each one of you will have the same. So if you start paying attention, you will see all of you have patterns. We basically take that data and we create a fingerprint or a biometric of it. Very, very powerful, because what it can help us to say is, even if somebody has the password right, we can still say it's not the actual card holder or the account holder who's typing in the password. So some powerful technology there as well. And then personal identity. We actually take a lot of emphasis on the different components of an identity. So yep, I've got a name and an address. I've got an identity number. But what about the typical phone numbers and email addresses and things that are associated to me? Because if criminals starts putting together a synthetic identity, they will use different components. So they will use my name, they will use your address, they will use your email address or somebody else's phone number, and that's how they construct these things. And so we pay a lot of attention to say, how do all of these things belong together? And why is it that I now have an identity where 3 of these elements I've never seen before associated to that identity? So just some ideas and things. Happy to talk to everybody or anybody afterwards if you want to explore some of this a little bit more. Let me run down because I want to make sure I don't run out of time. I keep on pressing the wrong button here, sorry. Lastly, we have this concept that we call connected intelligence. We also talked a little bit about as collaborative AI, where through the entire journey of a consumer, from the moment they open up an account to when they access a website or an app, to when they actually do a transaction, and what happens if something goes wrong with that transaction. We want to connect the intelligence and the data throughout that entire journey. Because if I know when somebody logged in or opened up my merchant app, by the time they do the payment, if I know that authentication was done really securely and strongly, I have less to worry about when I'm trying to authenticate when the payment needs to happen. So you can see that if we can connect the dots across the entire journey, we actually become a lot more powerful. So this is something that we definitely recommend you take a look at. It's identification, decisioning, and enhancement. We also look at it as before, during, and after the transaction, and really connecting the dots all the way through that journey. So I'm running through this a little bit faster than I hoped for, but in the end, if you look at this holistic picture, we have a tremendous amount of data. If we can just take a step back and connect the dots. One of the biggest problems we find in most organizations is the fact that we have silos. We have silos in terms of technology, we have silos in terms of people, and where they sit in our departments. We need to start bridging these things together and allowing technology to transfer and to run across so we can share the data. One of the biggest advancements that we had was when we opened up our authorization message so that a merchant can share their insights of risk with the issuing bank. Because now you've got more data that you can make a decision on. And that becomes a wonderful thing. And then we can add our intelligence in the middle as well. But connecting the different dots across this thing is important. Let me just briefly come back to AI and generative AI. I truly believe if we use generative AI correctly, we will be successful. So I'm an optimist, as you've probably realized by now. And I think generative AI, if we do not embrace it, it will be impossible for you to keep up with the attacks from the criminals. It just will not be, because they're going to be so far ahead. And so even when we speak to our regulators, the ask is, we need to take a risk-based approach to regulation when it comes to AI. Let's regulate the things that are important, that has an impact on the consumer, where biases and so forth can have a real implication. But there are other things where we can say, let industry progress. And I think that's my biggest ask also from you as you talk to regulators. If we can take a risk-based approach on AI, it will allow us to explore the frontiers, make sure we can use that effectively to defend our consumers, to defend our organizations, while the right things are being regulated. So regulations are absolutely needed, but we have to be mindful so we don't stifle the industry and we fall further and further behind the criminals who's got access to this technology, and of course, who do not care about the regulators and what they think, because they are not regulated. And so that's a big ask for us as well. We believe in AI for good. These are some of the things that we are focusing on. AI for good is very important. Something that I'm so passionate about is what generative AI can do for education, for instance. In India, they've created an app that's available via WhatsApp, where even if I can't read, the app can speak to me. So the wonderful thing about AI is I can start learning even if I'm not literate. So I can actually help myself. And the democratization of power like that, like education, healthcare. So there's a tremendous amount of good that's sitting in that technology. So if we're careful and we're mindful, we can actually get so much good out of it. Privacy enhancing technologies, something that we're actively investing in, something you should take a look at as well, that allows us to share data without sharing the underlying, or to share intelligence without sharing the underlying data. So for instance, I can let you know that Johan did a very good authentication at the merchant without sharing my private information. So there are ways in which we can let organizations globally share intelligence to make sure that we protect the consumer without touching the underlying data. So if you want to read up on privacy enhancing technologies, very, very important. Quantum computing, this thing is upon us. Mastercard participates in a number of forums where we're looking at the dangers of quantum computing to the way we encrypt, the way we store data. Definitely want to encourage you to participate in those forums. We're going to need standardization in terms of proofing our encryption against quantum technologies, making them more applicable for quantum, a world where quantum will come in. Personally, I think it's about 3 to 5 years before this problem will be fully upon us. 3 to 5 years in our industry is not a long time. We know that. So it's really a call to action. And then, of course, blockchain enhancements. Very lastly, something we believe digital currencies will be part of our future. And so we will continue to invest in that. I'm worried about cybersecurity in that area. Smart contracts has so many wonderful applications, but it truly is vulnerable. My time is unfortunately up, so this went way too fast even for me. But what I would like you to take away from today is we have to be very mindful around cybersecurity. Please do not look at it in isolation. Please look at technology. Join forces with other players in the financial industry, not just in country, in the region and around the world. Participate in industry bodies. There are wonderful industry bodies like the FS-ISAC, bring all financial institutions together in the fight against criminal. They also help us to help speak to our regulators in a more united and more consistent voice. So I really want to ask, join that, and let's collaborate together as we address this. And then don't be scared about AI. Embrace it and run with it. I think we've got a real strong potential there. I thank you for your attention today, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your day today. Thank you very much.